welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to be making probably the trendiest bag that is out right now. Today, we are going to be making the retro sling bag from Kandou Patterns. Now, this design is everywhere, right? This style of backpack, I have seen it in so many boutiques, so many like high-end stores. Everybody on social is wearing one of these. I've become obsessed with it as well. So whenever Caroline reached out to me and she sent me over this pattern she was working on, I flipped. She actually designed this bag as like a unisex bag. She has some great pictures of her husband wearing it. It is such a great bag. I'm so excited to share it with you today. So this is like a cross-body backpack. So I'm gonna show it to you on first, and then we'll go through all the little nooks and crannies. So when you put this on, you see there are two options back here. So depending on which way you want to wear it. So let me see how mine is. Mine is like this. So it's going to go. Now I like the strap going down the front like this. And I'm going to show you another way to wear it in just a moment. But so I have the strap going down the front just like this. My strap's a little long for me. And then if you turn around, oh, let me get a step stool. All right, let's see if this works better. So then when we turn around, you see the backpack goes on the back just like that. Isn't that adorable? I love this. Now, I have seen people wear the bag on the front as well, so we can give that a try. This is more like this. So this bag is a little big to be wearing it on the front, but I mean, it still works. See, this is still pretty cool. I've seen the front sling backpack worn more on the smaller size than this. All right, so this has been my first attempt, so let's walk through all the details. We have this cool little triangle shape here. I am using a snap. In today's tutorial, we are going to use a little hook and a loop, you'll see. But this is a little snap. You just unsnap that, and we have this great slip pocket right here on the front. You also have a small zip pocket right here on the front. And then you have your main body packet right here. Open that up. I know it's wrinkly. I still haven't ironed it. If you're on social media, you heard me go off about that. And then I opted for a mesh pocket inside. So this is just a simple slip pocket inside. That's it. You can add more zipper pockets to the inside if you'd like, but it's not required. I do want to mention too that this bag does have binding. The binding is not difficult. The binding is necessary. It gives the bag bones. It's like bones in the bag. It gives it great structure. It's just, I don't think you should modify it so that you don't have binding. I think the binding is really useful for this pattern specifically. Then when we turn it around, you can see we have the strap option here. I do want to talk about this in just a moment. But we have the strap here. We have a little hook here. This is for like hanging it on the wall. If you need to hang it somewhere, you can just easily put it up there. So it's not totally necessary, but it is a really nice feature. And then we have webbing here. This is that seatbelt webbing that I'm so in love with. I think it's so much fun. We have a slider. And then on the bottom here, we have two D-rings. So depending on which way you want to wear it, you're going to clip it to that D-ring. And then one of the things she always does that I love is she has this little pocket in the back. I think this is like a great passport pocket. This would be a fantastic travel bag. Travel's coming back, guys. I can feel it. It's coming back. So I love the design of this bag so much. And one version of this that I saw on Anthropologie's website, which I am obsessed with, used the same similar design. It's a little bit smaller, so it's easier to wear on the front, but it had a strap that looks like this. Now, these straps are just straps you can buy. They have two swivel hooks on the end. So you have the two swivel hooks on the end and a slider. It's just a pre-made strap. You can use it on anything. And I was thinking, what if we could use this on this bag? Now, I'm not going to show you how to do that in today's tutorial because I do want to stick to the pattern because I do think that this strap option is lovely. However, I will be telling you where to make changes if you want to use this instead of this. So pretty much what you would do is instead of this webbing and this longer strap piece here, we can use this hook up top to hook our removable strap to it like that, and then you can just hook the bottom to either side like you do the other strap. You're just gonna skip a couple steps. I'm gonna let you know in the pattern where you're gonna skip those and what steps you need to make sure you include to do this because I think that would be so cool. So thank you so much, Caroline, once again for allowing me to use your pattern in my tutorial. I got so excited about this one. I get so excited about all of Caroline's patterns. Kandou patterns are some of just the most classic, chic designs that are very simple and just beautiful, but can also be zhuzhed up to be pretty wild. I mean, you know we like some things to be a little wild here. I am going to be using wax canvas today. That's what this is. This is wax canvas. Wax canvas just gives it a really nice distressed look. It's very gender neutral. And then I'm also using waterproof canvas for the lining. Now, that combination of wax canvas and waterproof canvas means I'm not using any interfacing today. I'm using a couple scraps for hardware installation, but other than that, there is no woven interfacing. There is no Decoville light, fusible fleece, none of that. This is just the material. It doesn't need it. It doesn't need it. So by skipping the interfacing step, it actually makes putting this bag together pretty quickly. I cut out the pattern, cut out all the pattern pieces, sewed the whole bag together all in one day, which is pretty quick for me because I'm a very slow sewer. So in today's tutorial, once again, we will be using wax canvas and waterproof canvas because I do really want to show you that option. I will have links for all the material down in the description of this video, as well, of course, as the pattern. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down in the comment sections. I will have timestamps, as always, for every single step of this tutorial. It'll be listed down in the description of the video. You can also hover over the bottom of the video down here, and all those timestamps will just be running along the edge. All right, guys, let's get started. So from your exterior fabric, you're going to need at least 3/4 of a yard. I'm using this waxed canvas today. This is pretty much just canvas material that is coated in wax, which is why it's called wax canvas. I love wax canvas because it gives a nice aged kind of distressed look to your bag, but it withstands a lot. I have a couple bags that are made out of wax canvas that I use all the time, and they hold up perfectly. Next, we have our lining. Now, I'm using this waterproof canvas. I have 1 yard of it, and one thing I want to note about waterproof canvas is that it's all kind of different. So in my first bag, I used this beige waterproof canvas, and this is an OtterTex waterproof canvas. It is more firm, more stiff than this black waterproof canvas. This black waterproof canvas comes from Wonderground Fabrics, and it has more drape to it. It's a little bit lighter. So this stiff waterproof canvas definitely helped with the structure of the bag. I'm going to see if this one will do the same. Next up, for the lining pocket, I'm actually going to use mesh. So this is just from By Annie. This is just an easy mesh pocket. So I'm not going to be using the lining for the pocket on the inside of the bag. And then I've got a couple scraps of Decoville light. This is really just for the straps, but I'm actually not using any interfacing today. I'm not using any woven interfacing because I'm not really using any woven material. I'm not using any fusible fleece or anything like that. All of the structure of the bag is going to come from the material that I'm using and no interfacing. So it worked out on the first one. Let's see how it works out on this one. All right, the pattern calls for bias binding. I'm actually just going to use 1-inch strips of waterproof canvas for that. We'll go over that in the pattern piece step. Next, you're going to need some zipper tape. This is number 5 zipper tape. You're going to need at least 1 yard of it. We're just going to be cutting it down as we insert the zippers. We're going to have 3 zippers on this bag. So for that, I have my 3 little zipper pulls over here. I know I'm trying to keep the bag somewhat basic with the waterproof canvas and the wax canvas, but I'm going to add my bling on the zippers. Next, I have some fold over elastic. This is also from By Annie. This is just going to go on the top of my mesh pocket. You don't have to use elastic. You could use a piece of binding with quilt cotton, whatever you want, honestly. This is just quick and easy, and I have it. Then I have my strap. I have this beautiful nylon seat belt webbing strap. It's 1.5 inches wide. You're going to need at least 1 yard of it. I suggest you go find some fun stuff. You can use cotton webbing. That's a solid color. That's definitely fine, but there are so many fun options out there, so I'll have a link down below of where I get this. Next, we have the hardware for our strap. So you're going to need 2 1-inch D-rings or triangle rings. These are triangle rings. You just got to make sure your swivel can fit in those holes. Next, you're going to need a 1.5-inch swivel hook because we're using the 1.5-inch tape. Since this is a backpack, we do want wider straps. If you wanted to use 1-inch stuff, you definitely could. You just want to make sure your strap and your hardware are the same. And then also for that strap, we have a 1-inch slider so that we can adjust the size of it. So with these two D-rings, I'm mixing it up just a little bit because I don't have what the pattern requires on hand. The pattern requires a 1.5 inch D-ring for the top of the backpack, and this is what you're gonna use to hang it on a hook. Like if you're just hanging your backpack on a hook on the wall or something like that, you can use this for that. I am going to be using 1 inch hardware for this because that's what I have. I'm also gonna be doing the hook and D-ring closure on the top of the bag instead of the snaps this time. That also calls for a 1.5 inch D-ring. Again, I don't have that, so I'm going to use a 1 inch D-ring, but then I do have my 1.5 inch swivel down here for that. Now you can switch this up. You just have to pay attention when we're building the little strap tabs that go with all this, that you use the right size. So we'll try to mention that when we get to it in the pattern. And then finally, I have some rivets. I actually didn't use any rivets on the first bag, but I think I'm gonna add just a couple around the swivel hook just to kind of zhuzh it up. All right, here's a bunch of the other stuff. The thread I'm using today is Tex 45 weight. It's, of course, variegated thread from Wizardry Stitchery. I just love this stuff. This is like a Christmassy themed. It's red, white, and green, so that's going to be fun on the bag. The needles I'm using today are actually Schmetz Universal 9014 needles. Now, I do prefer to use Microtex, but I don't have any 9014 Microtex on hand. Because the layers are going to get a bit thick, especially using the material that I'm using, I do want to use a thicker needle today. Then for the bobbin, I'm just using polyester Gutermann. This is just from Joann's. For my marking tools, I of course have my vinyl marking pen. I have a heat erasing pen and then a chalk pencil. And then I have my trusty turning tool and a stiletto, and this is just a little seam press. This actually works really well with the combination of the wax canvas and the waterproof canvas. When we have those zippers and we have to really press down the seams, this has been great. This flat end here, it's great for that. And then my stiletto and seam ripper, my Kai scissors, and a basket full of clips. And then I have a few different tape options here. This is leather 1/2 inch double-sided tape. Honestly, tape is not going to work very well on the wax canvas. I'm just going to be honest. I was trying to use this. It works great on waterproof canvas. It'll stick to it really well. But on wax canvas, because we have that waxy coating, it doesn't stick too well. But I have it if I need it, so it's leather tape. And then I have a 1/4 inch tape. This is easier to sew over. It's not made for leather, really. And then just some duct tape. Again, if I just have to beat something into submission, I'm going to tape it down. All right, so let's start with our pattern pieces. First, we have pattern piece A. I'm just cutting 2 pieces. This is my exterior fabric and then my black lining. I know it's on the black table. We'll work on that as we go through the tutorial. One thing I want to note is that there are a lot of markings on these pattern pieces, so keep them close by. The first thing you're going to want to do is mark the midpoint on the top and the bottom, and then also mark the gusset seam midpoints. Now, I did this on the lining and the exterior, and what I did was I actually snipped a little triangle on those spots. If you do it now, it's going to save you some frustration later. So just go ahead and mark those now. Pattern piece B is the back zipper pocket. This is just the lining for the back zipper pocket. Pattern piece C is for the shoulder strap. Now, if you're choosing to use a pre-made bag strap like we talked about in the beginning of the tutorial, you don't actually need to use this. But I am going to show you how to make the shoulder strap today. So you're going to need 2 pieces of your exterior material. I'm not interfacing any of this stuff. Again, if you're using quilt cotton or anything like that, you do need to interface these. So this would have 2 woven interfacings on it. Next up, we have pattern pieces D, E, and F. Pattern piece D is the strap connector. Pattern piece E are the side connectors. You're going to need 2 of each of these. These are the exterior. If you're using woven material, apply your woven interfacing to this, so SF101 or Surfuse. I am not applying anything to it. And then I have my pattern piece F, which is the front pocket, that outer front triangle pocket. You need 1 cut of your exterior and 1 cut of your lining for that. So pattern pieces G and H, this is the front zip pocket lining. Pattern piece G there's just 1 nice rectangular cut. And then pattern piece H is the inner front panel. Just a nice little egg shape. You have 1 piece of exterior, 1 piece of lining. Again, make sure you pay attention. Interlining, if you want to use fusible fleece for that, that will work great. You could also just use a piece of cotton material. Interlining just beefs up the bag a little bit. It doesn't have to be fusible or anything. It can just be another piece of material, like I said, like cotton canvas or something like that. And then we have pieces J and I. So piece J is your gusset. If you want to switch this up from the other material, definitely do that. I'm using the same material for the exterior today, but you can get very creative with the prints here. So you need 1 cut of exterior and 1 cut of a lining from your gusset. And then pattern piece I is the upper front panel. Yes, we're going to be putting a zipper on this. It's a pretty strong curve. This is really, like, this right here is what makes this more an intermediate pattern, because this curve, that's a sharp curve. It's fine if you have experience doing like a smoother curve or like not such a sharp curve, you will be okay here. But if you haven't done curves before, this might be a little challenging for you. So we have the exterior and we have the lining. All right, here are some other cuts that are mentioned later in the pattern, but I want to give you guys a heads up already. So first, this is my binding. These are just long cuts. So these are at least 44 inches long each, but this is what I'm going to use for my binding. They're 1 inch by 44 inches. I think these are actually longer than that. As long as you can get them, you're going to need them pretty long for the binding, especially for the bigger piece. We only need 2. We're only going to be binding 2 seams today. If you're afraid of binding, just don't be. The binding step is pretty easy. It's the step before that that's hard. But you're going to have the bag sewn together before you attach the binding. The binding is easy. But I only wrap this around the edge of the material, and I don't double fold it or anything like that. I leave these edges raw. It's fine. Next up, we have 2 cuts of our exterior. So these are both 2 inches by 2 inches. And these are going to be for the swivel hooks on the bottom of the bag to attach the bottom of the strap to. We will be adding small cuts of Decovol to these straps as well as these other strap connectors just to support them a little bit more. Next, I have a 3 inch by 3 inch cut of exterior material. This is for the swivel hook connector on the top flap, okay? And then I have 2 cuts here that are 3 inches by 2 inches. And these are for the D-rings on the top of the bag. So one D-ring is going to be for the swivel connector to connect to. The other D-ring is going to be for like to hook it onto a hook on the wall. You know what I mean? A little loop. Since I'm using 1 inch hardware, I did have to change the sizes of this. So that's just something to remember. I mean, you don't have to use the hardware size that's in the pattern. But if you change your hardware size, you need to change your strap connectors so that it all fits. Okay, we'll go over it when we get there. Okay, so for the back pocket, you're going to need an 8-inch cut of your zipper tape. I have this adorable little pull on it. I know, it's so cute. What we're going to do real quick is we're just going to stitch down the ends at our sewing machine, just back and forth like 3 or 4 times. And then I'm also going to burn the edges of this so that we don't have to deal with this fraying over here. So once I have those edges sewn down, I do just grab a lighter because zipper tape frays so bad. And if you just take a second to just burn off the edges, you're not always going to have a problem with fraying, but if you do, it just prevents it, you know? So I feel like a lighter in the sewing room is kind of a random thing, but I wish we had cuter ones, honestly. I wish there was like a sewing lighter. All right, so on the back of pattern piece B, you're going to mark a rectangle that is a 7-inch by 1/2 inch rectangle. You can cut it out of the pattern piece, or you can just use a ruler and measure down like I did. I just measure down from the top, and then I just make my little 1/2 inch by 7-inch rectangle. This is just the opening for the zipper to go in. Next, you're going to grab your exterior pattern piece A. And this part's a little finicky, but I just want you to remember it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be super precise. So lay your exterior pattern piece A. With wax canvas, you never really can tell what's the front and the back. I think this is the back. I don't think it matters, honestly. But you're going to lay it right side up. We're going to lay our pattern piece A exterior right side up. And what we want to do is we want to take our B piece and lay it down on top, just like that. All right, that blue thing was too much. Here's what we want. We want this top edge of our rectangle here, so this top line here, to be 1 1/4 inch down from this edge. So let's look at this. If this is the back, this is the right side, okay? We want this rectangle to be 1 1/4 inch down from that edge. And we want the side of our rectangle to be 1 1/2 inch in from the bottom. Now this is not a perfect rectangle here, right? It's like an egg. So it's gonna be a little wonky. That's okay, just do your best. So what I do is I just kind of take my small ruler and I'm gonna measure 1 1/4 inch down from this top edge. And then I'm just gonna gently slide my pocket up to meet it. All right, so for the most part, this top line is 1 1/4 inch below this side edge. So now I want to go over here and do 1 1/2 inch in from the bottom. So I see I need to move the whole thing to the right a bit. So just carefully, I'm just going to move the whole thing to the right. And that's good. It's a little over 1 1/2 inches, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. So just kind of go around, finagle it if you need to. All right, I'm happy with where that is. Now I'm gonna grab some clips and probably some tape as well, because I don't want this to move before I get to the machine. I think actually clips will be fine. I can go on the top corners and the bottom corners. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine, and I'm actually just going to stitch along the long edges of my marked rectangles. You see I have 4 edges, right? 2 long, 2 short right here. I'm only gonna do the long edges, and I'm gonna backstitch well at the beginning and the end of each one. I have found that that trick does help reduce the puckering in the corners, you know what I mean? Like when you make these types of pockets, sometimes we get that annoying puckering right there. Just doing the long edges seems to be more useful for that. All right, once you have that stitched, I'm gonna grab a seam ripper and I'm just gonna rip right in the center on that center marked line. And I'm just gonna rip a slit carefully that's big enough for me to get my scissors into. And now I can take my scissors and continue cutting along this line until I get to those tips of my triangles, just like that. And then I'm gonna veer off and cut down to the corners of my marked rectangle. And get as close as you possibly can to the stitches without actually cutting them. Turn around and do the same on the other side of your pocket. Okay, now we want to take this and flip it through to the back of our exterior panel. So just be gentle while you do this. I know it seems kind of messy right here because it's like nothing wants to stay. Just work on one side at a time. That's what I do. I like to start with this kind of shorter top edge over here and just focus on that. So I'm just gonna roll it like that. And you find as you just kind of do one bit at a time, the rest kind of falls together. So just get that as good as you can. And this is actually where that little end of the bianni stiletto comes in really handy, because it's gonna help crease the wax canvas really well. The waterproof canvas does not care if you're trying to crease it. It's gonna fight you. So I'm actually gonna grab some tape and I'm gonna try to tape down this top edge, because you see when I let go of it, it just goes right back up. Ironing, I mean, you could iron it, but you gotta be careful with ironing anything close to the wax canvas because it'll just melt onto your iron. So I am avoiding ironing this entire tutorial. But if you're using quilt cotton here, you can definitely iron it. All right, so I'm actually taping it on that edge, and I'm taping it to the table, because if I just tape it to the wax canvas, it's gonna lift right back up. I just need this to stay still for a little bit while I work on the bottom edge here. There we go. And you can see this is much easier because everything is just gonna go right into place now. And I'm gonna push down with my little tool here. All right, so I'm going to try to add some clips where I can to help hold everything in place. If you're using material where you can use pins, you can definitely do that as well. You can just pin this all down, that'll help. All right, I'll lift this up. Just gonna kind of wrap my tape around the edge. There we go. All right, so now you see from the front, we have this hole here. It's kind of hard to tell. There's a hole there, see that? And it should be 1/2 inch by 7 inch. So now we're gonna grab our little zipper, and with the zipper going to the top when closed, we're going to lay this over it just like that. That's the goal here, okay? But we're gonna try to get it straighter than it is now. So on the back of our pocket here, we're gonna grab some double-sided tape, and we're gonna layer double-sided tape right along the edge of that opening. Look at this, my Scotch tape doesn't want to stick. So we're gonna lay it along the 2 long edges. So if you add the double-sided tape to the zipper tape, there's a chance that it's gonna be shown in the end. By adding it to the back of the lining pocket, we know we're not gonna see this tape in the end. So I'm gonna take my zipper and lay it right side up. And then I'm gonna take my exterior panel, and with the exterior right side up, I'm just gonna lay it over it and make sure it's not too far to the side, right? You don't wanna have the raw edge of your zipper just hanging out over here. It needs to cover the ends of the zipper tape completely. That's why sometimes it's better to leave your zipper tape even longer. Like an 8-inch zipper tape, we only have 1/2 inch on each side. If you did 9 or more, you would have plenty of room here to center this. So just think about that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this up, and I'm gonna remove the paper from that top edge. I'll tell you what, this tape, nothing wants to stick to my material. So I just have the sticky part of my tape on the top edge, and I'm going to line this up with my zipper tape and try to center my coils in that window. All right, so once I get one down, I'm just gonna press it down really well. And then I'm gonna pull out my zipper pull, and I'm gonna pull it all the way to the top. And by doing that, that should get me my coils as straight as they can be. So I have a better look here now of how it's gonna be. All right, it's pretty good. I'm not good at keeping these straight, so it's good enough. So now I'm gonna gently flip this whole panel up so that I have access to the other double-sided tape down here that still has the paper on it. And I'm gonna remove the paper from this. There we go. So now that's nice and sticky, and I'm just gonna gently fold it all back down. Sometimes things like to move around. The slower you go with things like this, the better it's gonna turn out, okay? There we go. All right, so that looks, I mean, it looks pretty straight. Pretty, well, not so centered, huh? Let's see if we can center it a little bit better. All right, I've finagled it enough. That's as good as it's gonna get. So while we have everything where we want it, let's quickly take this to the sewing machine. And we're going to top stitch around the edge of this rectangle on the exterior fabric and the lining fabric at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's gonna stitch the zipper in place. If you haven't already, make sure you flip this over and you check that enough of your zipper tape is hanging over the edge over here, okay? All right, I'm gonna take this tape off. And a couple things to note about this. I always backstitch quite a bit over the zipper coils because this zipper is gonna get a lot of use, right? We wanna make sure that those are a little bit more secure. And then I leave my tails at the beginning and the end, but I also do backstitch at the beginning and the end. So I just backstitch like one stitch at the beginning and the end, and then I leave all the tails so that I can flip this over and pull all of the threads. So all of the threads on the front and all the bobbin threads, I pull them all to the back here, so then I can just tie them all, and it just provides a little bit more security to your zipper, making sure it won't unravel. So you can see once I have all 4 threads back here, I will just double them up, and I just tie them in like 3 knots, and then I'll just clip down that. And since this is not going to be hidden in a seam, I am going to gently burn the tails. I have a little fire going. Don't do that. But I just very gently burn the tails and then smush it down. There we go. The zipper is installed. So now she gives this great tip in the pattern on how to cover this raw edge of your zipper tape by folding your lining up, just like this, and wrapping your lining around the bottom edge of your zipper tape, and then moving the exterior out of the way. What you do is you pretty much take it to the sewing machine. And you see I have it just like this, where my exterior is out of the way, my lining's over here, and that lining is wrapped around the bottom zipper edge. And then you just stitch right over it. And what that does is it creates a little pucker like that, and now you have that raw edge completely covered. I love that idea. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it on this or not. I did it on my first bag with the OtterTex waterproof canvas, and it added a good amount of bulk. So I don't think you can actually see it on the bag, but I can feel it right here. There's a good amount of bulk where that fold over is. I mean, it's not bad though, really. It felt bigger whenever I was working on it, but now it actually is pretty good. So, you know, we'll go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and do it. So just so you can see it. So we're gonna flip this up. And what you do is you kind of just have to feel it with your fingers. You don't really get to see where it is. But you can kind of look from the top and just feel with your fingers where the edge of that zipper tape is. You don't want to fold the zipper tape at all. So we're just feeling for the edge of that zipper tape, and then we wrap the lining around it, and then we're gonna clip it, just like this. All right, and then what you can do is kind of just flip it up, double check, make sure it's all caught. You don't want to be too far away from it either, because then you're gonna top stitch and still have your zipper tape showing and this weird little pinch in your lining. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this to the sewing machine. We're going to move everything to the left so that we're only dealing with this. So it's easier if you flip it so that you have the back of the exterior like this facing up and your lining over here. And all you see is this little edge here. We're just going to stitch it about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure we catch that zipper tape edge. Okay, so now I'm going to lay it so the exterior is wrong side up. And I'm going to flip this down. Did we get it? Yes, we got it. So now, I mean, the raw edge of the bottom zipper tape isn't noticeable. Up here, you're not really going to notice it because it's going to be so tightly closed here in the seam. So it's a more professional finish. I do like it. So give it a good press either with an iron or with your fingers just to smooth it out. All right. So now that we have that all prepped, let's close up this pocket. So we're going to take our pocket and fold it up right sides together and just line up the top corners together. All right, once you have the top edge clipped, if it doesn't line up totally perfect width-wise, that's okay. Sometimes when we make this pocket, we end up losing a little bit of the width around the pocket. So just, it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, none of this is gonna be seen. So now we're just gonna flatten it out with our hands like this, and then we'll clip down the sides as well. You can do this on both sides. I just smush it with my hands, just like that. Okay, so now we're gonna sew along these 3 clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. To do this, you're gonna wanna lay your back panel right side up, and what we do is we just fold the back panel out of the way, start stitching down. As we pivot, we unfold and refold. Make sure you don't hit a zipper or anything like that. Go all the way down, and then again, fold it out of the way. There we go. The back pocket is now done. Very cute. Let's start working on the straps for this. So now I'm going to grab some Decovil Light, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces of Decovil Light that are 2 inches by 1 inch. So I know I said I wasn't going to use my iron in this tutorial, but never say never. I actually am going to use my iron because I do want to fuse my pieces of Decovil Light to the back of my strap connectors. So I'm just going to center them. And then I'm going to grab a piece of scrap fabric and lay it over it because we don't want the iron touching it. And then I'm just going to gently fuse the Decovil Light to the back of that wax canvas. As long as your iron doesn't touch the wax canvas, you should be okay. And we don't need these perfectly fused. We just need them stuck to it mostly. We're going to sew it as well. All right, so once we have that, now I can just wrap the side edges of my exterior around my Decovil Light, and I'll grab a couple clips just to hold them together. Do this for both of your connectors all the way around. All right, so we don't need to do any top stitching along the edges of these because you're not really gonna see it at all. So grab your D-ring or your triangle ring, whatever you're using for your bottom connectors, and you're gonna line it up so that the flat end goes over the bottom raw edge of your material, just like this, and then you're just gonna wrap it all around. Now I know it might wanna come unfolded, that's okay. Just refold it, wrap it around nice and neat. Doesn't matter if the bottom is a little messy, no one's gonna see that. There we go. So this is what it should look like. Do the same thing with the other ring. Okay, now let's take these to the sewing machine and we're just gonna top stitch along the bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now grab your pattern piece ease, and she does suggest adding some interfacing to the bottom pointy parts of this. I'm not going to do that since I added my Decovil Light to this, but any way to support these is great. Just if you're going to do the interfacing, you're not going to add it to the top 1/4 inch here. You're just going to add it from pretty much this bottom little notch here down. So if you want to do that, you can. But what we want to do first is we want to fold down this top straight edge by a 1/4 inch. You might find that easiest if you take a ruler and you mark a 1/2 inch line down from this long edge on the back of your material. Now fold down that long edge to meet that marked line. And now you have a 1/4 inch fold over. Here we go. All right, if you can press it with an iron, go ahead and do that to keep it down. I'm gonna actually try this tool again. If you can't get it perfectly down, like if you're using vinyl or something, don't worry about it. We'll finagle it. But oh, this actually works pretty well. So cool. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to fold our little triangle in half, keeping that top edge folded in. There we go. It's like we're making those little paper footballs, remember? And then you're going to take your strap connector and your triangle ring or D-ring. You're just going to slide it right in to that fold, just like this. So the raw edge is on the side over here. That's now the longer straight edge. And your connector is tucked in, and I mean just right in there. It's not hanging out like this. It's completely tucked in as far as it can go to the left and as far as it can go down. There we go. And now we're just going to add clips all around here to hold everything together. So we have it just like that. Go ahead and repeat that with your other triangle unit and your strap connector. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the top edge here where our strap connector is and along the raw edge. We don't need to stitch along the folded edge here. If you want to, you can, but it's not necessary. And we're going to do that at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Remember, your bobbin thread will be showing on the back of this. This is a two-sided piece. So if you want to change your bobbin thread out, go ahead and do it. If you have a lot of thickness here like I do, you might want to adjust your tension. I'm going to be increasing my tension by 1 unit. So I think right now it's at a 5.5. I'm going to bring it up to a 6.5. And we're just going to do right along the top where our strap connector is, and then also along the raw edges. Alrighty, so you may have noticed I decided to do 2 rows of top stitching along this folded edge here. I just really want to secure that strap connector really well, so that helps. This folded edge here is going to be out, right? It's going to be left out and you're going to see it. So since I had to back stitch over here, I'm going to trim down these threads. And I did back stitch, I'm not knotting anything here, but even trimming them down, now we have like these little frayed bits of thread. To clean that up, just grab a lighter and just gently melt them. They'll just kind of tuck in on their own, and it also helps seal them. And you don't have to worry about burning your fabric or anything. We're not gonna hold it there for a long time. These edges over here I'm not worried about because this whole raw edge will be sewn into a seam. So now grab your back panel with your pocket and then grab your pattern piece, and you'll notice over here it says strap side connector. So line up your pattern piece on your back panel and then grab a marking tool and just mark where those connector marks are. So do this on both sides. Okay, so now take your straps and you're going to figure out how you want this to go. We're going to sew them in so that they're both going up towards the center, but right now I have my bobbin thread showing a lot, so I think I'm going to switch them actually. Hold on, let me get my other backpack. So here's a finished backpack. Let's see how, you know, you really kind of see them both equally. I'm trying to see which side do we see more, but you see them both equally. So I think you're good either way. So anyways, this edge here is wider than the markings. That's okay. You're going to try to make sure you have the same amount of overhang on both sides. So there we go. So I'm just laying it over. I have a little bit of overhang on the left and the right. That's fine. And then I'm clipping it in place. And do the same thing on the other side. All right, so now we're going to stitch this in place at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, there's the back panel so far, looking good. Let's put this to the side. So now we're going to work on the internal back pocket. Now, if you're using regular material, what you're going to do is you're going to just make pattern pieces that are this big. So you can see there's a dashed line here. You can just fold that down, kind of get out of the way. Like that. And you're going to cut out 2 lining pieces using that and then sew them wrong sides together, sew them into the seam, bind the top. We're going to do it a little different. Instead, we're going to use mesh. And the nice thing about mesh is that we don't have to be that precise. So you see what I'm going to do? I'm going to lay my mesh over my pattern piece, just like that. And I'm just going to snip around generously. Not even that worried about it. The goal here is that I have one edge that is straight. So if you have a kind of a messed up piece of mesh, just get your rotary cutter and a ruler so you have at least one edge that's straight. That's all you need. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my lining panel, and on the right side of it, I'm going to mark the placement lines for the internal pocket lining. So it's that dashed line there. And it's a little hard to see. So I'm just going to fold this out of the way and mark right there, just so I can see where this needs to line up. I'm gonna do this on both sides. Okay, so I have these blue marks here. That's where my pocket has to go. So to prep my pocket, I'm gonna grab my piece of mesh and see it's just gonna go just like that. But first I need to cover up the top raw edge. You could use quill cotton binding here, whatever you want. I am going to be using this fold over elastic because it's so easy. This is one of the easiest ways to do a lining slip pocket. I love it. And it's useful. I do like mesh pockets. So you can see I cut my fold over elastic so it's a little bit longer than the top edge. And you can decide, there's 2 sides. There's like a matte side and a shiny side. I think you can decide which one you want to be the right side. I'm gonna choose the matte side today. And all I do is lay it shiny side up, lay my mesh over it, and just fold it right over that top edge. And use some clips to hold it in place. Now when I sew this at the machine, I just use a regular straight stitch, which means that this top, you know, everything here is stretchy. The mesh is stretchy, the elastic is stretchy, but my stitch will not be stretchy. So if you want this to be a stretchy pocket, then you're going to use a stretch stitch or a zigzag stitch at your machine to attach this, and that will make sure that you can stretch the top of this pocket really well. I'm not going to do that. All right, so now I'm just going to stitch along the bottom raw edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold this binding on the top of my mesh. All right, cute pocket. So now I'm going to take my back lining panel and I'm just going to line up the top edge of my pocket, just my front side, there we go, with those blue marks, just like that. And I'm just going to clip at the top over here. I know it's a little hard to see, but I can see it at my machine because the pocket, my mesh covers the whole bottom section here. So now all I do is go to the machine, and while I'm stitching, I look at the panel underneath, and I'm just going to stitch this in place 1/4 inch all the way around this bottom edge of my lining pocket, and then I can just trim the mesh off. All right, there we go. Nice slip pocket. I can flip this upside down. And now I'm just going to just trace around the edge of my lining panel and trim down that mesh. And there we go. So that's quick and easy. The way the pattern does it is also really quick and easy. You don't have to turn anything out right side out or anything. You're just gonna pretty much put 2 pieces of lining wrong sides together and then bind the top, and then you're done. Okay, so now you're gonna grab your lining panel and your exterior panel. And if you're using interlining, you're gonna grab that here too. That could be even batting. That could be fusible fleece. That could be a piece of cotton canvas, a thicker piece of material, just something that's gonna be sandwiched in between these to make it beefier. I am not going to use anything like that. My OtterTex waterproof canvas was very thick, so I didn't need it. We're gonna see how this one works, but what we're gonna do is pretty much just do wrong sides together, lining and exterior. Just gonna lay them up. Those little eggs are gonna go wrong sides together just like this. So you might wanna line up the midpoints first if you have those marked. All right, so I marked where my gusset marks are on the sides, and I also marked the midpoints on the top and the bottom. I clipped them, and now I'm just gonna clip around the entire edge. Try to keep everything pretty flat. I find that my lining is a little bit bigger than my exterior just because that zipper pocket does kind of suck in the exterior just a little bit. Don't worry about that. We have a nice big seam allowance when we attach everything, so there is room for error here. It doesn't have to be perfectly lined up. Okay, so now we're gonna sew this together. You can do 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch seam allowance, whichever one is easier. We're gonna be sewing things at a 3/8 inch seam allowance later, so just make sure it's underneath that. All right, there you go. Now the back is completed. Now let's work on the straps. So now she gives you some suggestions here for measurements for your webbing. I'm going to cut mine to 32 inches. I think that's what I did on the first bag. If you're not sure who it's going to go for, definitely do like 36 inches, maybe more. But 32 inches is for size small. It's adult small. And because this is nylon and nylon likes to fray, we're going to just melt the edge of these straps, and that's going to make sure it does not fray at all while we're working on it. So that's great. So now grab your strap slider, and just remember your strap slider should be the same width as your strap. Take one edge of your strap and you're gonna push it up through the bottom, over that middle bar, and then down to the other side. And then we're gonna flip it to the back. Now the pattern suggests having this go under 2.5 inches. What you wanna do is you just wanna have enough so you can fold it in half. You wanna take this raw edge, fold it under, and you want it to be pretty close to that middle slider. So I'm going to do it just like this. I kind of just finagle it with my hands because what we want to do now is we want to stitch a rectangle to hold this flap in place. All right, so I have it just like this. I'm going to use some clips to hold it in place. I don't know if you can see from the top, but I have my raw edge tucked in here. It's folded under. I would say it's folded under almost an inch. I have about an inch here folded under. So yeah, it is about 2.5 inches slack then. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and with the folded edge facing up, we're going to pull the slider away, just like this. You're going to take this slider and you're going to pull it to the side, and we're going to stitch a rectangle as close as we can get to that metal bar without hitting it, and then down the sides and along this raw edge as well. A zipper foot's going to be helpful for you here. You might also want something called a hump jumper, or you can even use a piece of like a ruler or something. I'll show you at the machine, but whenever we pivot this section here is quite a bit higher than this front section, so sometimes we use this under our foot, but not under our needle, to help the presser foot stay at the same level as it's stitching. I'll show you. Alright, there we go. We got our little rectangle sewn. This is actually a little bit easier for me to do this. I'm usually a very, very messy top stitcher, especially with a rectangle, but because there are this gridded pattern, I was able to keep my line straighter. So that's great. So now I trimmed down the threads where I backstitched them, but I'm also going to burn them a little bit just so I don't have those little frayed bits. There we go. Okay, so now lay your strap with the slider facing down and that little rectangle facing up. Grab one of your swivels, and you're going to insert it on the other edge with the hook going down, just like this, see? So that way we can fold this in half, and when we do that, the hook is sticking out, and the raw edge is coming up to the back side of the swivel, and we can just insert that raw edge on the same side as our fold over right here. And it's gonna go up over the middle and then down the other side. Now you can give it some good slack like that. So you see, there you go. Now you have a strap that's ready to go. If you wanted to just make this a strap on its own, you could definitely grab another swivel hook, put this through it like that, make sure it's on, the swivel is on the same side as the slider, just like that. And then you could, just like we did with the slider, you could fold over this raw edge, do a rectangle stitch, and now you have your own little strap that you can interchange, which would be cool. Now we're going to continue on with making this shoulder strap here. If you have your own pre-made strap like I showed you in the beginning, you don't need to do this part. You can leave this part off, and I'll remind you of where to kind of come back in later in the video. But if you're building this, go ahead and do it this way. If you want, you can add fusible fleece to this strap to make it nice and squishy, especially if this is for a kid. I don't find it needs it for an adult bag, but if you want to, I'll tell you where to put it in. So now take your shoulder strap and lay it right side up, and we're going to attach this raw edge to the curved edge of the shoulder strap. So shoulder strap is right side up. Take your strap you've just made, and with the swivel facing down, swivel right side down, we're going to line up our strap with the midpoint of the shoulder strap up here. So what we're going to do is we can just fold this in half, and you can mark the midpoint with a tool. You can cut it, or with wax canvas you can actually just pinch it a little bit, and when you open it up you have a nice midpoint mark. So we're just going to center this over that midpoint mark, grab some clips and hold it in place. And now we're just going to stitch over this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go over it at least 2 times. So now let this strap hang straight down out of the bottom straight edge of the shoulder strap. Take your other C panel and lay it right side down so that the nylon strap here is sandwiched in between. And just match up all the edges together. And then we're going to clip along all these edges. Alright, now we're going to stitch along the curved clipped edges, leaving the bottom straight edge open. We're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch really well at the beginning and the end. So once you have this stitched, we're going to trim down the seam allowance just a little bit on the straight edges, not on the curved edge where it's connected, okay? So I'm just going to go straight up like that. That's it. I'm going to do this for both sides just to reduce the bulk a bit. And now this part is a little tricky. You're actually going to need to pull the whole thing out. And depending on your material, this can be a little challenging. So just give it a tug here and then just slowly fold it in on itself at the top and work your way down. Actually, that was a lot easier than it was the first time. I don't know why. All right, once you have it all turned out, this is where I like to grab my turning tool. I'm going to take the more blunt edge. I'm just going to stick it in all the way up to the top and push out the seams as much as I can. And then I can kind of hold it and scrape it along the seam on the side to get it nice and flat. Do the same thing on the other side, just pushing out those corners at the top and then scraping it along the side. There we go. So now at this point, if you want a little bit more padding, you can cut a smaller piece of fusible fleece and then just insert it in here and we'll stitch it into place. Depending on your material, you might want to do that, you might not want to do that. That's totally personal preference. I'm going to flatten this out. And again, I'm just going to use my table and my turning tool here to get in there and make sure I get the top edge really flat and the sides nice and even. You just want this to be a uniform shape, okay? That looks pretty good. So I'm going to grab some clips here and I'm going to clip along these seams just to make sure they don't fold or twist on me before I get to the machine. So now I'm just going to top stitch around all of the edges, including the raw edge, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That is looking so good. I want to show you the difference in the wax canvas. So this is the wax canvas after it's been kind of crinkled and turned out. You know, see all that distressing? Doesn't that look good? And this is the wax canvas before we've done anything. It's still perfectly flat. You see that difference? When we turn this bag out, this is gonna look like this. And I love that. I love wax canvas. All right, so now grab your connector for your D-ring. It's gonna be for the hook. If you wanna add a piece of Decoville light here, you can. I think I will. That piece of Decoville light, that's 1 inch by 3 inches, and I'm just gonna fuse it to the center of the back of my connector strap right here. Remember, my strap is 2 inches by 3 inches because I'm using a 1 inch D-ring. If you're using a 1.5 inch D-ring, this needs to be 3 inches by 3 inches. All right, so this is fused on. I'm just gonna wrap the raw edges around my Decoville light just like that. Now, this piece is seen just a little bit more than those connectors for the bottom were, so I am going to top stitch along the long folded edges of this. I'm top stitching through the Decoville light, and I'm just gonna do that at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap the strap connector around the bottom straight edge of the D-ring, so the back of it goes like that. So it looks nice and neat. And now we can just quickly stitch right along this raw edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to hold it together. So now take your strap and lay it right side up so that if you need to help with that, just look at your slider, right side up, and center this on the top short edge, just like that, and clip it in place. If you're using a pre-made strap, don't worry about this just yet. So now I'm going to sew this on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you have a pre-made strap, you should just have this over here, not attached to anything. And now we're going to work on the strap connector pattern piece D. Take these two pieces and lay them right sides together and sew along these side edges. So you know you have the top is shorter, the bottom is bigger. We're going to sew along the side edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So now, if you just have the strap connector and you don't have the shoulder strap, you're going to insert just the strap connector in through the bottom edge, or you can do it from the top. But you want it to go in the middle of the top shorter edge of this pattern piece D, okay? So you're gonna have it end up the same way we're doing it, it's just you have a smaller piece. But with the strap, what we're gonna do is we're gonna insert it in through the bottom here, all the way up until it gets to the top. And it should kind of fit in there just perfectly. So our strap should be just the right size. If it's a little bit smaller, just make sure it's centered, that's all. If you're just using this strap with the D-ring, just make sure it's centered. Once you have it in there, let's clip it so it doesn't move on us. There we go. And now we're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once we have that stitched in place, we're going to cut down all 4 corners of these D units at a 45-degree angle. So just make sure you're not cutting your strap, you're just cutting these corners. Go. And now you can pull on your strap or just reach in and get your little D-ring and pull this out so it turns right side out. All right, and then use your fingers to flatten out everything. If you need to use a turning tool, go ahead and do that to poke out those corners. Especially if you're only doing this D-ring here, then you definitely want to poke those corners out. And I'm gonna use clips to help hold the seams in place so they don't roll around on me. And now these corners here can be pretty bulky. I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch around all of the edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. But if you're not using a 90-14 needle by now, you probably wanna put one on because these corners are pretty bulky. Just go slow. All right, so since I'm doing the hook and D-ring closure for the bag, I have one more step. If you're doing the snap, then you don't need to worry about this. So I have another piece of my exterior material that's 2 inches by 3 inches because again, I'm using a 1-inch D-ring. And I'm going to wrap this around just like that. And I'm gonna grab some clips to hold it in place because I am going to top stitch these long edges again. So now I'm just gonna top stitch along both of these folded edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm gonna grab my D-ring and I'm just gonna thread my strap through my D-ring so that the raw edge wraps around that straight edge, just like that. And once again, I'm just going to stitch along this bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to hold it together before I stitch it onto the strap. Now, find the midpoint of the raw edge of your strap connector here. I'm just gonna fold it and pinch it. There we go. And on the right side, so the same side where you already have a D-ring, we're gonna lay our other D-ring and we're just gonna center it right along the top like that, close it in place. And now I'm just gonna stitch along this whole raw edge, anywhere between 1/8 and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, there we go. The strap is now done and it looks so good. So now we're gonna attach the strap to our back panel to finish that up. So you should have the midpoint already marked on your back panel. Take your strap and you're gonna lay back panel right side up, strap right side up, just like this. Center the top of your strap on the top of your back panel. And then grab some clips and clip in place. And now let's just sew this onto the back panel at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that finishes up the back panel. What you're gonna wanna do at some point now or in the future is you need to wrap up this strap and grab some sort of a rubber band, a hair tie, anything at all, and just hold this strap together because we do not want this getting in our way when we're sewing. If you're worried about how many layers there are here, we're gonna add more. So that's why I said you've gotta be on top of your needles today. Go ahead and set this to the side. So now grab the exterior outer front panel and lay it right side up. And you're gonna grab your lining front pocket, and just like we did with the back pocket, you're gonna mark a rectangle. This one is 6 inches by 1/2 inch, and you're gonna mark that on the back of your lining pocket panel. And we're gonna lay these right sides together. Line up the top edge of your lining with this little corner right here. It might not reach exactly, that's okay. Just try to center it as best you can, and then you can grab some clips and clip this together. If you can use pins, you can also do that. If you're using quilt cotton or anything, go ahead and use pins for this. There we go. And just like we did on the back, I'm just going to stitch along the long edges of the rectangle, making sure I back stitch at the beginning and the end and just stopping at those corners. So once we have those lines stitched, we're gonna use a seam ripper to just gently rip right along that center line to create a small hole, and then we can use our scissors to cut along that center line until we get to those corner triangles, and then just cut off to the corners gently. There we go. And then do the same thing on the other side. Now we're just gonna push this through to the back. We're doing the exact same thing that we did on the back panel, but I will walk you through it again. And all the way back. Again, I'm going to start by just focusing on that shorter top edge of my pocket. I'm just gonna press it with my hands to try to get it nice and straight. I'm going to use my little pressing tool here and some tape to hold this down. I think we can also use some clips here to help us since we're close to this corner. Right, and then I'm going to grab some masking tape. It's not going to stick too great because of that wax canvas, but it's better than nothing. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom edge. I'm just going to gently roll the edge over. And if you want to make sure you don't see any of the lining on the front of your bag around this edge here, as you're rolling it, just make sure you can see a little bit of the exterior peeking through. And that will make sure the exterior is kind of rolled over towards the back and you won't see any of the lining then. There we go. All right, it's a little poofy, but I think we'll be okay. So now when we flip this over, we have that pocket just like that. So now this is how I usually cut my zipper tape. I'm just gonna cut it so that it's longer than that window, just like that. And now I'm going to grab one of my zipper pulls, and I'll just attach my zipper pull onto my zipper tape. There we go. So now I'm going to flip this back over. I'm going to add some double-sided tape along the long edges on the lining side here. And that's going to kind of help me hold my zipper in place. So I'm removing the paper from the top edge first. I'm going to grab my zipper tape. And when the zipper is closed, the pull is going to go to the left. I'm going to take my front panel, and I'm just going to center it over that zipper tape. Move that zipper pull out of the way. And try to get this as straight as possible. Then I pull the pull all the way to the left to get this nice and straight. There we go. That looks good. So now I'm just going to lift this up and take the paper off of the bottom tape without pulling the whole tape off. There we go. And then gently just put this back down and flatten it out. All right, we did it. So now I'm going to top stitch around this window at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Remember, I do like to go over the zipper coils a couple times just to extra secure them. There we go. That's looking cute, isn't it? All right, so I did back stitch again and leave the tails. So that means I can just pull on my bobbin threads to pull the front top stitching thread, so that colorful thread, to the back. If you're pulling on your bobbin thread and you can't get that top thread to come back at all, like it's totally jammed, it's not going to come back, just cut it. Because if you can't get that thread to pull back, it's unlikely that it's coming undone. It's probably pretty knotted inside of the fabric already. So just pull back what you can. All right, so I'm going to trim down the sides of my zipper tape just so it's not all the way in the seam. And I'm going to go ahead and once again wrap the lining around that bottom edge of our zipper tape. So I'm just going to pull it up. And again, I'm just feeling it with my fingers, making sure I don't fold the zipper tape. Wrapping it around there as best as I can. Here we go. Now I'm going to take the whole unit and get the exterior and the lining all to the left side, just so I see this little tiny clipped edge here, and I'm going to stitch right along that fold at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Moment of truth. See if I caught it. I did. Good. Caught it. Beautiful. All right, so just to close up this pocket once again, try to flatten that out. You can iron it if you want. Just get it nice and flat. Take the bottom raw edge of your pocket and fold it up to meet the top. Grab your clips and just clip along the top edge and also the side edges. So just flatten it out as you go. I find it easiest to do the top edge first, and then I just pivot it and gently flatten it out with my hands. All right, now let's sew along all 3 edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Remember, when you're doing this, flip it so that the exterior is right side up, and then you just fold it out of the way and go along all the edges, except for the bottom edge. You don't need to sew along that edge. So I forgot to pull this out when I was showing the materials, but this is my bag tag, and I'm going to attach my bag tag centered and just a little bit lower. Let me see how high. So I'm going to have it centered and 1.5 inches from the bottom. So first thing we want to do is pull this pocket out of the way. You don't want to sew through that. So just lay this nice and flat with the pocket out of the way. I'm going to measure 1.5 inches up from my midpoint mark here on the bottom. There we go. And then I can just kind of lay this at the top of my ruler. That looks good. I'm actually going to grab a scrap piece of tape to try to hold this in place, because that's not going to it's not going to stay there on its own. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch around all the edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm not going to stitch over the tape. I will move it, but I'll start over here on the bottom and go around. I don't back stitch when I do my tags. I do leave the tails long, and then I tie them off on the back. Isn't that adorable? I love it. All right, I'm going to flip it over and just gently pull on these bobbin threads to get the top threads to the back side. There we go. Now I have 4 pieces of string here, so I'm just gonna double them up and tie them in about 3 knots. There we go. And I'm gonna trim the threads, but I'm not gonna burn them or anything because this is gonna be inside the bag. You'll never see it. There we go. So cute. So just like I did on my other strap connectors, I have a smaller cut of Decoville Light going down the center of my exterior fabric for the strap. This exterior piece of fabric is 3 inches by 3 inches, and then my Decoville Light is 1.5 inches by 3 inches. So what I'm going to do is fold the sides around it just like that. Now, it looks like this should be pretty close in the seam, so we shouldn't have to worry about top stitching the edges here. If you want to go ahead and just top stitch these folded edges down so you don't have to worry about it, go ahead and do that. Okay, so the pattern suggests after you have wrapped the sides into the center that you actually cut this down to 1.5 inches wide. So it's going to be a very tight strap connector here, and I think that's the goal. We want this to be really tucked into the seam. So I am going to use my ruler here to just measure in 1.5 inches and mark a line, and then I'll cut along that line. There we go. And then, keeping everything folded, I'm going to wrap this around my hook down here. Okay, so this is a very short strap here. You're going to want to use a zipper foot to sew this together. So we're going to sew along this edge right here. You can do 1/8 of an inch seam allowance or 1/4 of an inch, but you want to make sure, depending on how thick this bar is for you, you want to make sure you have at least 1/2 of an inch between the raw edge to where you feel that metal bar, because we will be sewing this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance in just a little bit. So make sure this isn't too short. Okay, so I believe this is only for if you're doing the swivel hook closure. We want to trim off 3/8 of an inch from the top short edge of our front outer panel. So I'm just going to grab my little ruler here. There we go. Trim off 3/8 of an inch. There we go. Just want to shorten it up a little bit. And now we're going to take our swivel hook and we're going to center it on the top edge there and stitch it on. So to find the center, I can just fold this in half, give it a little press. And again, wax canvas is great for this. So I will just center this on there, grab some clips. I know this strap is very, very tight, okay? So let's stitch that on. Again, anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch seam allowance. When we stitch the lining on, we're gonna need 3/8 of an inch here, so make sure you don't lose too much real estate right here. So now that we have that done, it's time to add the lining. If you trimmed off 3/8 of an inch from the top of your exterior, you're gonna wanna do the same thing for the lining. So just grab your lining panel, grab a ruler, and trim off 3/8 of an inch from the top. And you should have only done this if you're doing the swivel hook. If you're doing the snap, you don't need to do this. So now take the lining and exterior for the front panel and lay them right sides together. And let's just line up all of the edges as best we can. Again, because we did that pocket on the front, sometimes that causes the whole exterior to kind of shrink in on itself. So just do your best. So I have a couple clips down here to hold it in place, but what we're actually concerned about is just this top triangle piece. So let's start with the top edge here. There we go. And then we're going to go along these side curves. We're not going to be stitching the bottom. We're only going to be doing the top piece here. All right, so starting on one of these corners right here, you're going to stitch up along the curve and along the top and along the other curve to the other corner at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Up here, again, use a zipper foot and just get as close as you can to that swivel hook if you're using the swivel hook. If you can't get 3/8 of an inch in, then don't do 3/8 of an inch. Just get as close as you can, but don't hit that swivel with your needle. All right, once you have this sewn, we're gonna trim down the corners to 45 degrees. So you just kind of go right along the edge of it. Also down here, do these corners as well. And then to help smooth it all out, we're gonna trim into the seam allowance every 1/2 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch. You just cut up to the stitches, but you don't actually cut the stitches. This will allow the fabric to spread out and fold over itself, so you get a nice smooth curve. You don't need to do anything on this top edge over here where it's straight. You only do this on the curved edges. All right, so reach inside and grab your snap or your hook, whatever, and just gently pull the top edge through. There we go. It's looking good. And then I'm gonna grab my turning tool and push that in to poke out the corners. There we go. So do your best to push out all of the seams. Get it nice and flat. And then I'm going to grab some clips and clip along these edges just to keep the seams exactly the way I have them. You don't have to finagle too much with this corner over here because this is all going to be eaten up in the seam anyways. It doesn't have to be perfect any which way. So I'm also gonna add a couple clips to the bottom because I'm gonna close up all these edges. There we go. So I'm gonna take this to the machine now and I'm gonna top stitch along all of my edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just making sure that this is nice and neat. Those corners are nice and neat. And I'm just gonna stitch right below this connector. So see how tight that is right there? That's exactly what we wanted. We don't want this flailing around a lot. We want it nice and tight in the seam. Alright, so I didn't add rivets to the other one, but I feel like that could be kind of cute here, wouldn't it? So let's see, I'm going to grab my hole punch out and my rivet press. I know I didn't show that in the beginning. I have a whole video going over my rivet press. If you're interested, I will link it in the corner over here. So I'm going to put one rivet there. I'm just eyeballing this. That looks about right. So I'm just going to press the holes for the rivets. Alright, let's empty these rivets out and just put a couple cuties in here. Oh yeah, that's going to look cute, isn't it? I'm going to grab my other rivet press that has the die on it. You don't need 2 rivet presses. I like to collect things. I'm just going to press these down. Alright, there we go. Got some rivets. So you can go ahead and put this to the side for just a moment. So now grab your inner front panel lining and exterior. And if you haven't marked the midpoints on the top and bottom and also the gusset marks, make sure you go ahead and do that. We're going to take these and lay them wrong sides together. If you're using interlining, if you're using fusible fleece, if you're using anything that you want to beef up this material, go ahead and place that in between these. But remember, these are wrong sides together. If you have those midpoint marks and gusset marks, you can line up everything like that. Or you can just eyeball it. Now let's take this to the machine and stitch around all the edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to hold everything together. Alright, so take this and lay it exterior right side up and grab your front panel and you're going to lay it right on top. So first line up the bottoms because those should come together the exact same, and add some clips. Okay, and you'll notice these top corners, they extend farther than the panel behind them, and that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to just keep lining up the edge, and as we get to those corners, we're going to push them in so that this whole front pocket center kind of poofs up. That gives it a really cool look. Let's do the same thing on the other side. All right. So it might be easier if you just kind of reach in and push it up like that. That way you're not fighting it so much. So you can add a couple more clips to help. So now we're going to start over here on the right and we're going to stitch down the sides and the bottom at a 1/4 inch seam allowance to attach these panels together. Remember to keep this center part poofed up like that, okay? All right, once you have this attached, go ahead and put it to the side. So now we're going to work on the gusset. Make sure you mark your midpoints on your lining and your exterior. So we're going to start with the exterior first. To prep your zipper, cut your zipper tape to 15 inches long and stitch over the edge of the zipper tape that will be closed when the zipper is open. So you see this side here, this will be open, this edge down here will be closed. So we're going to stitch down the closed end. So now take your exterior panel and lay it right side up and have it like in a smile shape. Take your zipper and open it all the way. So open the edge just like that and pull the zipper as close as you can get it to that stitching. Don't let it fly off the edge, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to lay your zipper right side down on the right side of this top curved panel. And I'm going to start over here on the right. I'm going to align the edge of my zipper tape with the corner here of this top curved edge. And then I'm just going to clip those together. Remember, this is right sides together. And then I'm going to continue along my smile, clipping my zipper tape to this curve. Now, once you get to this stronger curve here, the goal is not to keep the zipper flat, okay? The goal is the zipper is going to curve up. That's okay. The zipper teeth are going to come up towards you. That's what we want. So as we get to these curves here, I'm not trying to keep my zipper tape flat and then curve it. I'm letting the teeth come up, And I'm just worried about the edge of my zipper tape. That's it. Because the way the bag is in the end, these teeth stick forward. They don't go straight. Remember, it's a bag, not a quilt block. As we're pinching along this edge, those zipper teeth want to go up. We're going to let them do that. And you can see I use a lot of clips along the curves. All right, using a zipper foot, we're going to sew along this curved clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end, and keep that zipper pull out of the way. You can see I have a very long, dangly zipper here. We don't want to sew on that. All right, how did that go? If you went really slow, you should be okay. All right, it's looking good. So now we're gonna grab the lining, and we are gonna lay the lining right side down over our exterior. So right sides together, okay? And we're gonna sandwich that zipper in between them. So I find it easiest to line up these short edges first. And I'm not even focused on the zipper right now. I'm just focused on the exterior and the lining panels. And then I'm just going to match up along that curve where my zipper is. So I find it useful to match up those midpoints on the top part of my smile and then curve around the edges. Okay, so to attach this, what I like to do at the sewing machine is flip this whole unit over so I'm looking at the wrong side of my exterior where I already have the stitches, and I'm going to stitch right on top and actually just a little bit towards the left, towards the other edge of my panel with the raw edge over here. Just barely. I mean, like if you couldn't get it right on top of the stitching and it had to just kiss one side or the other, you want it to kiss on the left side. So that way, when we turn this out, you don't see this stitching here. So I'm just gonna go right back over those stitches, just another 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once we have all of that attached, again, be gentle with your zipper over here. You don't want that zipper pull to leave you. Now let's grab our scissors. Be careful with the other edge of your zipper tape. And we're just going to snip about every 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch along the seam, getting close to the stitches, but we're not cutting the stitches. And this will just allow that curve to fold in on itself when we turn it out. So we have a nice smooth curve. Now let's flip this out so our lining and exterior are now wrong sides together. So you might find it easiest to start with one edge and then clip those together. Wrong sides together, there we go. This is gonna look good, guys. I can feel it. Okay, let's go to the other edge now. Careful with my zipper pull. Giant zip, no, don't go off the edge. Okay, and I just kind of pull along the raw edges and then along the zipper tape to get it nice and flat. If you have material here that you can iron, after you get this pulled out, you're going to want to press right along the zipper tape. I actually find it easier, so I'm going to close it a little bit. Don't get too excited here. I did that before. You start closing it to see what it looks like, and bye-bye. Zipper pull's gone, so don't do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the edge of my zipper tape, and I'm just going to pull on the zipper tape to get it nice and straight right along the edge. And then I'm going to clip on the raw edges, just like this, all the way around. So since I'm not going to press this with an iron by the zipper tape, I am going to use my little by Annie stiletto here. And I'm going to press that down right there. All right, so you see how my zipper, it sticks straight up, right? It doesn't lay flat. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be up like this. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna top stitch along the edge of our front exterior panel. It's gonna go through the exterior, it's gonna go through the lining and the zipper tape. We're gonna go right along that edge by the zipper. You're gonna find it easier if you just let that zipper go up, okay? So I'm once again gonna open up my zipper all the way, carefully. And as I do this, I just don't want you to push down on the zipper tape trying to get it flat, because what happens is it's gonna make kind of a wavy, wonky zipper. The zipper tape should be up. So if it's easier for you to do it with the zipper closed, do it that way. Just try to keep that zipper tape nice and up like this. So if your zipper tape or anything does have a little bit of a wave here, don't even worry about it. Once we get the other part in, it's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good. Okay, so we have that top stitch. Now we're going to go back again to the sewing machine, and we're going to just stitch along the short edges and also these outer raw edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just to hold everything together. If anything shifted around back here, just grab your lining and just smush it up. Try to get everything caught in the stitching here. If you're doing the snap, now you're going to install the male end of your snap right here. Very easy to do. Now let's finish doing the gusset. So for the gussets, big thing here is make sure you mark your midpoints. Okay, so I have it on my exterior. I need to do it on my lining still. Okay, so take your upper front panel that you have your zipper attached to and lay it right side up. So actually, before we attach the gusset, what I'm going to do here is see if I close my zipper all the way and my zipper pull is going to go off on me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch this closed and I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew over these teeth really well. They're not closed, they're open, but I need them to stay together for the next step. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so now that my zipper teeth are closed, I'm going to grab my exterior gusset panel and I'm going to lay it right side down so that the short edge matches up with that short edge that I just stitched. And if these are not the exact same size, that's okay. Just center it. So let me flip this over so you can see. So take your zipper panel and center it on your gusset. Like I said, it's okay if the gusset is a little bit wider. We're gonna clean that up in just a moment. There we go. Clip these short edges together. Now let's rotate this, keep everything nice and flat. Remember, everything is right sides together. And then we're gonna take the other short end, and if you have zipper extending, go ahead and trim that down. So it's all one length now. And now we're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna pull this up and center it, if it's not the exact same size, on the short edge of our gusset panel. So I have probably 1/8 of an inch hanging over on each side. That's fine. We will be fine with that. So now let's stitch along both of these clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, once those are sewn on, lay your unit so that you have the lining facing right side up, the one that's attached to the zipper, and then take your gusset lining and lay it right side down. So lining right sides together. And then just attach this lining on the same spot you attach the exterior gusset. Okay, just line it up. Should be exactly the same size as the other gusset. So just clip these together. Do the same on the other side. So now our zipper unit is sandwiched in between the exterior and the lining gusset pieces. All right, so now we're just gonna stitch right over those previous stitches, a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once the lining and the exterior are all sewn together, let's cut these corners down by just cutting it off at a 45-degree angle like that. Do this for both sides. Now let's flip this so that the gussets are wrong sides together. So you see, if we kind of pull on it, we have like a little skirt now, right? So I'm just finger pressing along these edges, making sure I'm lining up the sides as well. But right now I'm just focused on the seam that we just sewed because I want a top stitch there. So I just want everything to stay together so that I can get a clean top stitch right there. So I'm gonna do this for both sides, just pressing along the edge, pulling the lining back, making sure it's nice and tight. Nothing is skewed too much. And clip along the edges. All right, now let's stitch right along these clipped edges. And it's going to be on the bottom gusset panel, 1/8 of an inch away from that seam. All right, so we have that top stitched. This is looking really nice. You can kind of get a good idea of the shape of the bag here. I know it's still a little wonky, that's okay. So what we want to do now is, if your gusset is wider than the area with your zipper at the top over here, line it up before we top stitch the edges. Line it up so that the lining and the exterior of the gusset are at the exact same spots on the side, just like this. And I just hold it between my fingers. And then grab some scissors and just starting at this top edge, just gently trim down at an angle. See, just like that. That way this is all one solid edge here. We don't have like a big jump from one panel to the next. But we're not trimming the whole edge of the gusset. We just need to angle it down to clean it up a bit. So I'm going to do the same thing over here on the side. I'm going to go up from the bottom. Just enough to get to the zipper tape, but I'm not going to cut the zipper tape. There we go. And now it's all one solid line. So I'm going to do this side as well. The hardest part here is just keeping the lining and the exterior together. But even if they're a little off, don't worry about it. We have so much room for error here. Do the same thing on the other side. All right, now what we want to do is we want to attach the lining and the exterior gussets, wrong sides together. So start with your midpoints down here. We just want to stitch right along these raw edges so that we don't have to keep battling it. I know it kind of feels like one panel is longer than the other because it's a curve, so it does that. If you just straighten it out, you'll see they're the same size. But when you curve it, I know, it's like the lining is longer than the exterior. It's not, it's just a curve. So I'm just adding clips along all the raw edges of my gusset lining and exterior panels. All right, once these are all clipped, we can sew along the raw edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so now your gusset and side panel is done, so we pretty much just have to attach the 3 pieces, the front, the back, and the sides. So we're going to grab our front panel first, take your top flap, and you're going to tuck it into that pocket. We don't want to worry about it. And I also like to take my zipper and move it to the middle, especially if you have a longer zipper pull, you don't want to accidentally sew over anything over here. So now take your gusset panel and lay it with the lining side flipped out. So flip out the lining side like this. And if you need to mark the midpoint on the zipper tape, let's go ahead and do that. So you can fold the whole top edge here all the way down. And then grab a marking tool or scissors and just mark the midpoint on our zipper tape. That's going to make it easier to attach the front panel. So now take your gusset, like I said, lining side facing out, raw edge of zipper up. You might want to unzip this. It might be easier that way. There we go. Now take your front panel. And you're going to take your front panel and lay it exterior side down, lining side up. And what we're going to do is we're just going to attach it to the edge that's up right here, this raw edge, and the leftover zipper tape that we haven't sewn in yet. So start with the zipper tape and match up those midpoint marks. The midpoint mark you just made on the zipper tape and the midpoint mark on the top of your front panel. And then let's flip it around and let's do the bottom as well. This is why we have all those marks. It makes this step much easier. Okay, now flip it to the side. And we're going to do gusset mark. So here's my gusset mark here to the actual gusset seam with the zipper. So where the zipper starts, there we go, with that gusset mark. If you've lost your marks, go grab your template and remark them. Flip this over, do the same thing. Gusset mark to gusset mark. There we go. I know, it's a lot to deal with right now. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of push this in like a bowl. So I always like to start with the straight edges, and then I'll work with these really sharp curves. I mean, these corners down here are no joke. Those are some sharp curves. So I'm going to start with the easier part. So I'll do the zipper up here. And just always double check your marks, your midpoint marks, your gusset marks, making sure everything is lined up, because sometimes when we pull on these corners a lot, our material shifts and one midpoint mark is 2 inches away from the other one. So I like to kind of do a loose clip first, and then if I need to use my scissors to clip into the zipper or clip into the gusset to help it spread out more, then I'll do that. But I'm just going to do a loose clip first to see where I need some extra help. So you see how I'm just kind of tucking it in like a bowl, like that. My front panel is getting tucked in. My gusset is like a little wall, just standing up all the way around. So I know down here in this corner, I definitely need some extra help. I'm going to have a lot of pleats if I try to just sew this without expanding the gusset at all. All right, so now when I'm looking at this, I have a lot of bunching on this bottom corner, which is exactly what you would expect. It's a very sharp corner. So what I'm going to do is where I have the bunching, I'm going to cut little slits in my gusset, no more than 1/4 inch. Just like that. So we're not cutting big cuts here, just 1/4 inch in towards the gusset. There we go. And what that does is it allows the fabric now to spread out more. So now I can spread that gusset around that corner on my front panel. We're not clipping any of the front panel. We are only clipping the gusset and the zippers. That's it. So over here in this other corner, I have the same problem. I have a lot of bunching here. That's going to be pleats if I don't clip my gusset. So I'm just going to go around. I clip into my gusset exactly where I know the problem is, and then just a few clips around that as well. All right, now that I have that clipped, I can put it back in here. And my gusset now can easily stretch around that curve without all the bunching. Okay, so that's good. Now let's take a look at the zipper. I don't see any problem with the zipper. I do keep my scissors with me at the sewing machine. So if I seem to be having an issue with pleating on this outer panel around the zipper top edge, I can just clip into the zipper tape a little bit. Again, no more than 1/8 of an inch on the zipper tape. It doesn't need to spread that much, but zipper tape has a bit of stretch to it, so you should be okay. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip this whole unit so that we have the gusset facing up. We're gonna tuck it out of our way, and we're gonna sew it like this. We're gonna sew it from the gusset side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around 2 times. You want to do this twice, okay? Go slow. You will need to use a zipper foot because we are sewing along the zipper as well. Use a stiletto to help keep everything in place, and just every couple inches or every inch even, stop, check, make sure everything's lined up, and keep going around. The first go around is usually pretty rough, and then as you go around a second time, you might notice on the curves here you have some jagged stitches. The second go around is going to be a lot easier, and that's where you're going to smooth out those edges. There you go. How did you do? You know what I like to do right now? I like to just turn it out to look at it. So you should do that anyway. So I'm going to zip it all the way up. And I'm going to flip the whole thing out just to look at it real quick. See how it looks. Make sure I check my corners down here. Those look good. Those corners look really good down there. Okay, I'm just going to flip this up because I want to see the whole thing. Oh yeah, that's looking so cute, isn't it? It's so cute. So it's not that bad. And you know what? This waterproof canvas that I'm using for the lining is so much easier to work with than the OklaRoots. Because the OklaRoots at this point, I was fighting it a lot. It's very stiff and it likes to hit against my sewing machine while I'm sewing. This was so much easier. So that's fantastic. All right, so we're actually gonna add the binding for this piece now. So grab one of your binding strips. We're just gonna lay this over just like this. And I like to cut down the curves right here. We have a tendency to always make this a bigger seam allowance than what we're trying to do. So I'm just gonna trim this down just a bit, not down to a 1/4 inch or anything, just pretty much down to a 3/8 inch, which is what it's supposed to be. I can tell right here that it's bigger than it needs to be. So I'm just gonna go around a little bit, just like that. And I did keep my seam allowance at 3/8 of an inch when I was by the zipper. You're supposed to go to a 1/4 inch, but 3/8 of an inch with a number 5 zipper you can still do. And I think it's gonna help me with my binding just a little bit. So now I'm gonna grab my strip of waterproof canvas. Remember, this is like 44 inches long, 1 inch wide. And I'm gonna start on one of these flat edges here. And I'm just gonna take it right side up, wrong side down. And all I do is just wrap it around that seam. And I look on the front and the back to make sure it's covering all the stitching. And then I just add a clip, and that's all I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna wrap it around, check the front and the back, add a clip around the whole unit. The only place that this is a little noticeable is around this zipper up here, because we are binding the zipper. So you do see the raw edges of the binding by the zipper when you open the bag. And if you use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, you might have to extend your binding just a little bit, because you don't want the binding to get in the zipper teeth. So make sure if you're doing the binding, you don't wrap it too close to those zipper teeth. If it has to kind of poof up and not come right against the edge, that's okay. And when I do binding, I get pleats all over the place. They do not bother me. If you want to make this totally invisible, use the same color thread. So use black thread in your bobbin and in your top stitching. And I mean, you won't see this at all. All right, once you get close to where you started, this is much longer than it needs to be. I just have it overhang about 1 inch or so, and then I cut it like that. And then I can just wrap this around my beginning binding, just like that, and add it into the clips. Okay? Now everything is enclosed. None of this is going to stretch or shift on me. I don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now I'm going to look around. All right, and I add lots and lots of clips to hold everything together. But binding right now should not be the hard step because you already did all the hard stuff with the curves and everything. It's all together. You're just adding this on top of it. So now once all the binding is on, I'm going to once again take this to the sewing machine and laying it with the gusset side up. I'm going to stitch around, I don't know. I don't stitch too close to the raw edges of the binding because I want to make sure I catch the back as well. So a lot of times I will just stitch right down the middle of my binding, and that will make sure that I catch both edges. But I would just do a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. It doesn't have to be a full 1/4 of an inch, but maybe more than 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. I do use my zipper foot for this. Once you're done, go around and check the back and make sure you caught all of the binding. It looks okay. I've got like a little pleat parade down here, but that is okay. Let's check around the zipper, make sure everything's good. That's good. So if you used a stiletto and you noticed that while you were holding on to your binding, you ended up kind of pulling on the edge. I mean, it is still material that can fray. So I had it somewhere. Okay, so like right here, I have a little tiny bit of fraying. If you have an edge that's just starting to fray a little bit, go ahead and just burn it down. Don't light it on fire like I do. Burn it down, just melt it. And that will help. That will help clean that up. There you go. All right, so one binding, one side is done. Now we just have to repeat that for the back. I'm gonna turn it out again because I wanna see it. So the combination of the thicker seams and that binding reminds me of a wedding dress and how a wedding dress has boning in it. It gives it really good structure. Oh, my zipper pull went in the wrong side. Look at that. Get out here, silly. Let's see, when we open this up. So the binding is most noticeable right here around the zipper. But I think it still looks really, really cool. Isn't that great? All right, so let's attach the back. So I have a rubber band. So what we want to do is we want to fold the strap in on itself so it's completely out of our way. So I'm just folding it up a whole bunch, and then I'm gonna add a rubber band around it. There we go. We don't want this in our way. So some things to keep in mind here when we're stitching. We don't want these straps in our way. We don't want this metal triangle rings or this zipper. So just push everything in as we're doing this, okay? So flip your front panel and gusset so that it's lining side out. Let's go ahead and open that zipper as well. There we go. And lay it up just like this so that the raw edges are facing up towards you. And then take your back panel and lay that exterior right side down so that you're looking at the back of your panel. You're looking at the lining with the slip pocket. And now let's match up our midpoints on the top, bottom, and the gussets. And remember, the gusset marks on your back panel line up with the seam between the gusset and your zipper panel. And then once you have those 4 marks together, start clipping along any of the straighter edges you have. Always start with the easiest stuff first. So as you go around these curves, again, you can clip them first if you want, but I like to just do a rough go around where I just clip it all together and I see where my bunching is and then I start clipping. Because you can clip too many slits in the gusset, and that can cause a problem too. If your gusset ends up being a little too wide everywhere, you can still get pleats doing it that way. Okay, so as expected, these bottom corners, again, need a little extra help. So remember, we're never trimming on the back panel. We're only trimming slits in the gusset. No more than 1/4 of an inch. And you're gonna trim in the exact spot that's giving you trouble, and then just trim outside of that as well. That way you have a lot of wiggle room here. And then you should be able to just tuck in those corners with everything nice and flat, no pleating anywhere. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. All right, there we go. So once again, we're gonna flip this so that it's gusset side up. This might give you a fight. This waterproof canvas is so much easier to work with than OtterTex. With OtterTex, you couldn't even push it down. It was just like a firm concrete wall. But what you want to do, you're going to smush this out of your way, okay? So don't try to keep anything neat here. Smush whatever you're not working on, it's fine. It'll be fine. We're going to stitch around the entire clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, we're going twice around. Use your stiletto to help keep everything in place. A zipper foot is not necessary for this one, but it might be helpful just because we do have so much fabric trying to rise up, and we have a thin area here where we can keep it flat. There we go. If you want to flip it out to check it out, you can. I'm actually just going to feel inside. Depending on the material you used, flipping this out can be a little challenging, so I can just feel around. I'm pretty good. I don't have any pleats anywhere. That's fantastic. So the last step is just putting the binding on this. So once again, I am going to kind of trim down. See some of these edges, these corners here. I'm not trimming it down a lot. You're not trying to trim it down a lot to a different seam allowance. You just, if your seam allowance is a little too big, the binding won't be able to cover the stitches. So that's the only reason we trim this down a little bit. But if you trim it down too much, you're going to have the opposite problem where your binding wants to cover way too much. You don't want that either. So I'm just cleaning it up a little bit to make it easier for my binding. And as I'm binding, if I find a curvy edge where I just cannot wrap that binding around and cover up the seams, then I'll just trim that down at that point. So just like we did before, we're going to take our binding and we're going to wrap it so that the right side is facing out and the wrong side is going against the edge and covering all the stitching. Again, I always like to start on a flat edge. It's just easier to start and stop there. All right, once you have the binding clipped in place, we're just going to take this back to the sewing machine and we're going to lay it with the front panel lining side up so the gusset is side up. And we're just going to stitch along the middle of the binding just like we did on the other part. I'm just using a top stitching, and you just want to make sure you catch both the front and the back of the binding. There's the final binding. Once again, if you have any shredding of your waterproof canvas, you can light a match and just kind of melt it down. I'm just checking all my edges. I'm close on some edges, but I think I'm okay. So now what we want to do is we want to turn the whole bag right side out. Depending on your material, this can be kind of challenging. When I was using the OtterTex waterproof canvas, this was pretty hard to do. Just take your time, go slow. If you get impatient, that's when you accidentally rip things. So if you need to walk away from it for a moment, just walk away from it. But this is much easier to turn out with this lighter weight waterproof canvas. So I'm going to reach in and push out the bottom. So then just push along all that binding and it will get its structure really nice. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Oh yeah. All right, I'm going to close up my zippers real quick. I'm gonna take off this rubber band, and then let's pull out the flap so we can just hook that up here on this first hook, this bottom hook. Look at that. Isn't that cool looking? And then I can flip it around and attach it down like that. Oh yeah, that looks great. So I will say it's not as stiff and structured as my first bag, but it's not losing anything. Like, I'm not worried about this flopping down. It'll be definitely easier to carry. I think I need to poke out the corners up here a little bit more. But this will be very easy to carry. It's nice and lightweight. It's beautiful, perfect size. Love, love, love this design. All right, are you ready for the final look of our bag? Look how pretty it is. I love it so much. I know I'm keeping it very basic, very simple with the wax canvas and the waterproof canvas, and it's all kind of, you know, just very neutral, which we like, but I got my bling in there, okay? I got my rainbow in there. I got my funky zipper pulls. I absolutely love this. And then we did use the little hook up top instead of the snaps. Either way, it'll work. Either way is great. I will say, let's talk about the difference in waterproof canvas, okay? So this is the one we just made. This is the one I made previously. This gray one is using OtterTex waterproof canvas, which is much stiffer and thicker than the waterproof canvas we were using on this one, which is from Wonderground Fabrics. So they both have great structure. The gray one does have more. However, the gray one was very challenging to sew at some points and also turn out in the end, because we had so many layers of that really thick waterproof canvas. This bag was much, much easier to make, and it also still has really great structure. So if you're trying this out for the first time and you haven't really worked with wax canvas and you haven't really worked with waterproof canvas, make it easier for yourself. Get the waterproof canvas from Wonderground Fabrics, which is a little bit lighter in weight, but has the same exact effect as the OtterTex. Once you are more comfortable with your machine and all those layers, then definitely go for the OtterTex as well if that's what you want to do. So once again, thank you so much, Caroline, for sending over this pattern. I've had so much fun making this, and now that I've made two beautiful, neutral, chill kind of bags, you know I gotta make another one with my wild vinyl and all the colors, so be on the lookout for that on social media, because we gotta see how many different versions of this we can make. I think this would also be beautiful in like a faux leather vinyl. Oh my gosh, it would look so chic in a faux leather or a real leather if you want to do this on your industrial. Man, or you could use like a flannel. A flannel would look really cute with this if you're going apple picking or something. I know, I go off. I just love bags so much. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye guys.